Hi, I'm Izzy Gentry. Welcome back to Made to Walk. Today we're going to be walking through basic liabilities. So, if you've been thinking about starting a nonprofit or you are a nonprofit leader, if you are a church leader, then maybe you haven't thought about all the things that could go wrong. As a pre-mortem thinker, we think about all of the things that could go awry and we tried to build solutions specifically for those things. So today we are going to be walking through basic liability. It's not exactly the most exciting topic, but a necessary one for all organizations to have the basic essentials. It's important for you to know to talk to your insurance company and your legal team about your specific needs specific to your area or state, but we can go through some of the basic essentials. The first, if it is mobile, it is putting you at risk. So it does not matter if you are meeting in a different classroom, if you are moving from one location to another in a vehicle, or you are just moving equipment. These things can be putting you at risk. So, how do we help to keep ourselves from the liability of these issues? Forms are obviously hugely successful when you are trying to just get in a vehicle and move people from one area to another. Maybe they're doing a local missions, maybe you're doing an international missions. Make sure that you are very thorough about your itinerary down to the most nitty-gritty detail. I like to tell people it sounds like you're being condescending if you give too much detail, but you're not. People will be very, very, very happy that you are sharing too much information than not enough. So, you want to give yourself 10 business days to create your plan into place when you are doing anything that involves any kind of mobility. So if you are moving your group from meeting in one location to the other, make sure that you give plenty of notice. Make sure that if you are changing a system, that you give plenty of details and specifics as to why you're changing that system. If you are moving, let's just say TVs down from one room to another, that you let people know, hey, we're going to have these rooms closed off for these specific days because we're going to be moving things around. So it lets people know not to just be coming in and out, putting themselves at risk of something falling on them. Also, when you are doing any kind of local missions or international missions, that you give the specifics. What is the flight number? What is the gate number? You might have someone who's running late, who misses the shuttle, who misses leaving the hotel on time. When you share these specific details, you are making sure that you are being as transparent as possible for people to be able to connect and also check on the individuals who are participating in this matter. Let's look at media. Today, you cannot do anything without having some form of media. So, regardless if you are utilizing photography or videography, we want you to be able to be as transparent as possible about those things. So, putting signs out that say, we are filming in this area, we are filming this specific event helps people to understand. But I also like to tell people that there should be a safe zone. So maybe you have someone that's more at risk. Maybe they're from the crisis center or they're leaving an abusive situation. Maybe they're just testing church out. They don't really want to be on the front cover of your Facebook post. So there should always be one area that is a photography or videography free zone so that they know that that's where you want to sit if you don't want to be filmed or photographed. Never use personal phones. Always use a designated phone or media flash drive that stays on premise. So I like to think of this as the two-step rule, and we talk about this a lot in different aspects of liability. Take two steps back and ask yourself if it still makes sense. So I'll give you an example. Maybe you're running a VBS or you're running a children's program. You're very limited on media resources. So you ask all of the volunteers to take photos of their specific groups so that they can text them to the director so they can make a slideshow later. Seems totally innocent and seems very resourceful with your time. But when you take two steps back, you ask yourself from a third party perspective, why are individuals taking pictures on their personal devices of underage children? And We have no way of identifying if they stay there securely, if they're shared with other people, or if they're ever deleted. So, this is not exactly the safest way to go about being resourceful in sharing your media. So, if you are going to have other people participate in taking photos, make sure that you resource them with opportunities to utilize something, even if they're using their own cameras, provide them with the flash drive that stays on campus. If they're supposed to be using phones, then maybe they are using ministry phones only specifically for that event. Surveillance and audio files should never be kept to one person to have to be over that entire area for accountability reasons. One, if something were to ever go awry and that person is the only person to know how to function that aspect of your safety measures, it can be an issue. Two, there's just not enough accountability as to who and why they've given the permissions and the accesses that they have to other members. And three, because we always have to put something in place that protects ourselves from people. We understand that people always want to trust other people and that they are using these resources to the benefit of the nonprofit or the ministry, but sometimes we are not always as lucky to have that situation be the innocence that we hope it to be. So we need to make sure that we are creating opportunities for accountability. Let's look at family engagement. It's very difficult for us to think about having a super fun family event while having a bunch of boundaries and parameters. But actually, boundaries and parameters help people to feel safe and to be able to engage more fully. So don't be afraid of putting things in place that you would deemed to consider being a deterrent for fun. It's actually not that way. Use lots of signage. So if there's an area of the building, an area of the organization's resources that they don't need to be by, so even if you're at like a public park, but they don't need to be behind a certain area because you're holding all of the electrical equipment or the band equipment and things like that. Make sure that you have the proper fencing or signage to deter people from that area so that you don't have anyone that says, well, I didn't know. Also, it's very important for you to take into consideration that people just don't always know. Like, you think it's common sense not to go in the building if no one's in the building, but then you'll have a kid that's missing and everyone's running around and they're trying to find them, and then they'll find them inside the building, and the first thing they're going to say is, why did you have the building unlocked? How did my kid get in there? So if you have signage that's very specific, especially when you're talking about the difference between an at-will engagement and a surrender engagement. So an at-will engagement says you and your family are participating at your own risk. So you are coming as a family to enjoy the event, but we are not liable for anything that happens. Surrender engagement says you are surrendering someone to me and I am taking responsibility for them. So a youth camp or a VBS, something that involves them having to sign in their child and leave them on premise. Even if they're going to a separate room, they're still surrendering that individual to you. So if it is an at-will engagement, it's okay to have a sign at the entrance that says you are here and you are participating at your own will and at your own risk, to just let people know that, hey, if you have a bump, you have a bruise, we're going to give you the resources that we hope will help to get you through that incident, like medical care, making sure that we have triage to some capacity, a tent that is resourceful. Surely you can have a volunteer nurse or someone in the medical field that would like to participate in that manner. But also making sure that you know what is the process if we do need to call for an emergency. What is the access for paramedics to be able to enter in if an ambulance needs to get through this area? How are we getting them through? How are we moving them through the people? Make sure that you think through this process and this plan. Of course, we hope that none of these things are actually needed, but what you don't want to be doing in real time is trying to problem solve. What ends up happening is you lose massive amounts of time, and those massive amounts of time are what actually make you liable. So if someone is hurt and the process is, well, I don't know what to do, go and tell Sally, and Sally says, well, I don't know what to do, go and tell Bob, and Bob goes, well, I don't know, go find Edward, and you have this huge miscommunication of who's actually supposed to be in charge of this. If someone is being held, they're on location while you're trying to figure it out and the problem proceeds to increase worse, that's when it becomes an issue for you. If the first instinct is, okay, we have a problem, this is our process, and you go through your process and you alleviate them over to medical care, then you've done your part as, being a responsible individual and making sure that they got the care that they needed from professionals. Never skip the signage. I know I just went through this and I'm always emphasizing always lock doors, always make sure that you understand what your locking system is. And let's just say you're a small organization, maybe you're a baby organization, or you're just thinking about starting and you're like, look, I can't afford a security team and I can't afford all these fancy, fobs and, scanning cards and this, that, whatever. It is okay to have the most simplistic system as long as you have a system. So a very simplistic system would be a sign-in system, which essentially you sign in when you come in and you write down very specifically what you're there for. So if they say, hey, I've got to go back into this classroom because I left my cell phone in there last Wednesday and I just want to go and retrieve it. You're going to write that down and then you're going to walk them over. They're going to go and get the thing that they needed. They don't need to be roaming alone. And then you walk them back and they sign out. If for any reason something that you thought was completely innocent ends up being part of a bigger investigation and they come and they say, did this person come here? What did they ask for? Oh, they grabbed a phone. Did you verify it was their phone? Well, no, of course I didn't verify that it was their phone. Okay, what time did they come in here and when did they leave? You're able to be transparent about that information. What you don't ever want to be caught doing is saying, I don't really remember. And I think that they came in, but I can't recall what day it was or what time. You just want to be able to have access to resources that are able to help you to be transparent. So that's what you need to know when it comes to sign edge and signing in. Your public Wi-Fi system. So many churches obviously have Wi-Fi for specific volunteers to be able to come in and utilize their resources, or they might have a cafe. You might have an area that you have volunteers coming in and out helping throughout the week. They're only there for a couple hours at a time. These things are fine in this video portion of the podcast. So if you are not watching the video portion, please visit madetowalk.org, go to the media page and find the basic liabilities video. This slide I would just go ahead and screenshot and send over to your IT team. This is really for them to understand the basic language of what needs to go into having public Wi-Fi. If you choose to have private Wi-Fi, I want you to know that that doesn't put you directly not at risk, okay? Because you're still giving people access to your Wi-Fi, even if they are employees or long-term using volunteers, because you are allowing them to use their own personal devices on that Wi-Fi. Ways that you can keep that from being an issue is to restrict people from utilizing their own resources on ground. So providing staff with internal cell phones or computers that have very specific parameters put in place so that you've already had your IT team go in and block certain servers, certain sites, certain search engines to keep that from being an issue. Mandatory reporting when it comes to NGOs. And if you are thinking, look, I don't even know what I would need to report, I'm going to go through some of those basic things again. They kind of seem like common sense, but I get these questions a lot. So if someone is threatening to cause bodily harm either to someone else or themselves, it is a mandatory report. However, you need to take into consideration who you're talking to. So if you're talking to a teen who is threatening to cause harm to themselves, maybe working with an NGO that specifically works with teenage girls or teenage boys can help in the advocacy to make sure that they get the services that they need following their transport to medical care. If you have someone that is suffering from a PTSD episode, but you know that they're a veteran, maybe reaching out to an NGO that specifically works with veterans, or maybe you are blessed enough within your organization to have a veteran ministry, you would want to reach out to them to be in participation to the conversation. You never just want to cut people at the knees and say, hey, we don't want you to do that here, but we also don't want to give you the resources to be able to walk through this issue that you are experiencing right now, this trauma. Injury, when it comes to physical abuse, if you are noticing that there are trends to physical abuse, children with excessive bruises or consistent breaks, you need to be able to document that and to consider reaching out and making a CPS report. Substance abuse, if someone is coming on grounds and is intoxicated, especially when picking someone up. And so this might be something that you would see like in a youth group or a college group. If a friend is coming to pick them up or a parent is coming to pick them up, and you can clearly see that they are intoxicated to some capacity, or maybe they've had a touch of drugs somewhere along the way, you just know that they are not capable of driving. It's important for you to know that you want to not release that individual until you call the cops out to assess the situation. You may very well be wrong, but it's better for you to get it right than for you to be in a situation where you allowed someone to get into a vehicle leaving your premise, you acknowledging that you felt something was wrong and you still let them leave, and then an accident happened somewhere down the road. Neglect. There are often times when I hear of stories that people bring a kid and just never come back for them, either because they have substance issues, they forgot, maybe it's just clear abandonment. Regardless, you need to be able to know what is the plan associated with dealing with neglect, and what NGOs or resources of advocacy do we have at our disposal. Now, the reason why I say specific states have specific details that you want to take into consideration is because when you're talking about medical neglect, it's a very murky water. So if you see that someone is not getting the care that they need, you have to take into consideration. You can make a report, but in some states, there's an exception to medical neglect for parents who choose not to seek medical care for their children due to religious beliefs. So just kind of know in your mind what is going to be our response to this, because we don't want to deter these people from coming to church, but if we obviously see that there's a problem, how are we going to respond so that we don't react in real time and say something that can be hurtful or harmful to the individual? So, non-visible points of mandatory reporting would be sexual abuse. So, sexual abuse can often be seen as a very typical drastic change in behavior or disclosure. So, they might tell a volunteer or through prayer, this has happened to me. And so, what do we do with that? We need to mandatory report it. Human trafficking. These are, you would be surprised how bold these individuals are when trafficking. They will come to your events. They have no problem. The pimp will actually bring an individual that they're trafficking out to something they want to go to if it means that they're in control with them. They never leave them alone, never allow them to pay for anything themselves. There just seems to be something a little off in the age demographic. Maybe there's an expansion, and so you want to be able to reach out to an NGO that specifically works with human trafficking and allow their task force or connections with their local CAC to investigate. Emotional abuse. Have resources of knowing how do we help an individual that is going through emotional abuse. One of my biggest pet peeves with organizations is that they have a built-in system for empathy, but they don't have a built-in system to resolve the issue when it comes to emotional abuse, because it's not something you can call 911 and say, hey, like, this person's in an emotionally abusive relationship. It's just one of those things that you need to have a process in place. What is a way that we are going to disciple these individuals to be able to move through this phase of relationship that they're in, and then help them to not get into another emotionally abusive relationship? So maybe it's all they've ever known. It's a home aspect they grew up with, and now it's something that they are experiencing in their own personal relationships. So these are just ways that you would deal with trauma. I emphasize consistently that the way that we triage individuals is a life or death situation for an organization. It's not that it doesn't happen. It's not that it does happen. It's that if and when it happens, we need to know how we are going to deal with people in their traumatic times of life. Social media and gaming. So I'm a big no access supporter. And the reason why I say that because I've heard arguments and I've actually made arguments in the past about accessibility for teens of saying, like, well, what happens if I hear that there is an international event in a city that my teen is on a local missions trip to? I want to be able to reach my kid. And so there can be a lot of argument about safety on the argument about why teenagers need to have cell phones. So you need to have very specific details about what that might look for. Like, yes, they can have a phone, but only, like a phone that doesn't allow for app downloads or for social media. So like a flip phone or an old school, Nokia phone kind of a situation. If it's something that really is about access to communicating with your child. But other than that, it becomes very dangerous in today's society, even more so than what I would advocate for necessarily 10 years ago, because now students are using their apps to run away. They're using it to call Ubers to leave the hotels that they're staying at. They're using it to purchase vapes. Vapes are probably the most common and the most dangerous, especially because today we see more of these vapes being laced with other things like fentanyl, LSD, and a series of other drugs that have nothing to do with just, they're addicted to nicotine. No, we've far extended from that. They share their locations. Students are often using something called Life 360. It was initially created for families to be able to know where their kids were. Kids started using it to share their location to the entire school so they could see where their friends are at all times. It also tells parents, adults, where they are at all times. And so it can be a very dangerous tool to share locations. Snapchat they use to share locations. And so you can get unplanned visitors that way. Um, Never should volunteers or leaders be chatting directly with students. That's not in a documented way. So if you need to send an email directly to a student, let's just say parents don't come to church, student gets dropped off, but we want to reach out. We want to see if they're okay. We haven't seen them in a few weeks. You can directly email from a device that is provided from the organization, and you want to CC or BCC other leadership on that communication so that they know and you're being transparent about what it is that you're asking, what it is that you're communicating, and what kind of advice you are advising. But unfortunately, we see a lot of grooming come through personal communications. And so that is why, to protect the organization and also the individuals on both ends, we just very much so discourage away from directly communicating with underage individuals. So, what is the scripture verse that connects with our basic liabilities, right? Because I feel like I've heard so many arguments on both sides. Like, well, is that really loving? If we're thinking about everything that could go wrong, like, God will just protect us as an organization. Like, we don't need to be worried about this kind of stuff. He'll figure it out. He'll work it out. I want to look at 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 9. Just bear with me here. It says, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness but denying its power. Avoid such people. For among them, after those who creep into households and capture weak women, burdened with sins and led astray by various passions, always learning and never able to arrive to the knowledge of the truth, just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so these men also oppose the truth. Men corrupted in mind and disqualified regarding the faith, but they will not get very far, for their folly will be plain to all, as was that of those two men. So the reason I pulled these particular verses is because I want people to understand that I genuinely do believe that we are closer and closer to the end times. And in these last days, we are going to see that not everyone has the best interests of an organization, and especially a Christian organization, to thrive. They are looking for ways to destroy what is good, when they're looking for ways to corrupt what is good. And as much as we want to believe that every person that walks through our doors and asks for our services are there because they genuinely are looking for opportunity to grow and they are looking for opportunity to serve, we know that that's just unfortunately not the reality. So, to protect other people, we have to consistently keep in mind ways that we can protect the organization, but also the people inside the organization, because it's not enough just to protect us. That's how you get so many of these documentaries these days of people being burnt or hurt by churches that are doing everything they can to self preserve themselves. When we need to be very active in looking and keeping as watchmen on the tower for the enemy at bay, who was looking for opportunities to hurt those that are under our care. So, part of being a good shepherd is consistently asking ourselves, if we know the motives and the behavior of the enemy, then how are we protecting ourselves to thwart against the enemy's moves? And through basic liabilities, it gives us the opportunity to be able to put those things in place so that the sheep can be safer, so that they can learn and they can be in the presence of the shepherd and they can truly come to cultivate safe relationships. We're not going to always get it right, but we want to open ourselves to growth and implement things as we learn in the process to be able to do these things well. I hope this was helpful to you. And as always, I look forward to doing more.